Hey, everybody, welcome to the Body, Soul, and Spirit podcast. I hope that all these podcasts have been such a help to you guys because it's really my desire to see you healthy and to get on the journey of being healthy and grow emotionally, growing in the mind. That is so important. I want to talk today about we've been talking about vulnerability. We've been talking about growing and having the capacity, right, to grow and being vulnerable and having the capacity to let down our self-defense mechanisms and self-protection modes that we have carried on because of trauma for so long, which aren't letting us learn. They're not letting us get curious about ourselves. We're uncomfortable with it. We detach, and we talked about attachment and detachment last time. But what I want to talk about today is the vulnerability is necessary, right, for our growth. And when you're vulnerable, we do something. When you're vulnerable, you are able to express yourself in a very liberating way. Not in an unhealthy way. I'm not saying that because there's just some people that are obnoxious and they're just loud and they just say everything. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about being able to express yourself in a healthy way. You express your needs in a healthy way. You express yourself in a healthy way. And in order for us, what's required for learning capacity is for us to be able to express ourselves in a healthy way. One of the reasons why we don't learn or we're not learning emotionally, I guess, is because we don't express ourselves correctly or healthy. The reason being is because we're stuffing our emotions. Let me tell you something about neurophysiology that I was studying. The human being has three fundamental ways to respond. Okay, three ways that we typically have a way to respond, three modes that we respond to people, to our environment, to our external life. And there's one mode called the fundamental mode. And this is kind of like the brain stem part of our brain. Now, when you look at reptiles have this. And it's their way of dealing with anything that challenges them, anything that feels like an attack externally. And what it does in this fundamental mode, in this reptile brain, if you will, for us is our brainstem, but they have a way of dealing with anything that's external. And what they do is they freeze. That's how they do it. So let's say they sink underwater. That would be a freeze mode for them, a reptile. They go underwater and they freeze. And what they're doing is they're conserving their energy and they just freeze. Well, it's great for a reptile, right? Because, it's a reptile. They don't necessarily have to express themselves, but it's really deadly for a human being because what it's doing, it's interfering with all our learning. So that's one mode. So we freeze, right? Have you ever just, because of trauma, your life just kind of froze? Your emotions got stuffed, right? It's like the way to conserve your energy is to just detach, to self-protect, right? So that's what these reptiles do. Now, the other mode that neurophysiologically speaking is the fight or flight response. And what happens, this happens in the brain, and it activates always the sympathetic nervous system. This is where you see adrenaline and cortisol, which are stress hormones. And this is the part of us that gives us more energy, and it increases our heart. We're going to feel it physically, pumps more blood to our brain, to our muscles, which gives us more sugar. But the problem with both of these modes is their defense modes. So think about that. They're defense modes. And it's possible that a human being can be in defense mode for many, many years. You're on defense mode. So you have your heart beating fast and your fight and flight steps in and you feel an attack and you're in fight and flight mode. Now, I'm going to say something very important that I don't want you to forget. You can either be in defensive mode or you can be in growth mode and learning mode. but you cannot be both at the same time. So think about your own personal life. Have you been in defensive mode or have you been in learning and growth mode? You cannot have both. Okay. It's not like, oh, well, I learned from this experience and, but you're always on the defensive side. It's impossible. Yes, you may have learned from experiences of the past. I'm not saying that you didn't learn anything, but what I'm saying is it's impossible to be in a situation where you're on the defensive mode and at the same time you're growing and learning mode. You can't be in both. Your brain, I'm talking about your brain development. I'm talking about the way your brain functions. So the mode in which we are learning, right, is I'm paying attention, let's say to another person, or listening to the message that they're delivering. When I'm activated in such a way as to, I'm taking in their information, right? And I'm observing you. I'm seeing your facial expressions. I'm taking in the information. But if I've been in fight or flight mode for a long time or freeze mode for a long time, I'm activating certain parts of my brain, whether it's that, central nervous system, and now cortisol, stress levels are high, and my heart is, pumping, and I'm thinking that, this person doesn't want the best for me. Maybe I'm suspicious of it, right? There's no way I can learn anything at that moment. And it's important for us to understand what's happening inside of us because believe it or not, but it's actually even affecting your brain function, the way you function. So we are unable to be in fight or flight mode at the same time as learning mode or even social engagement mode where we have socially, right? Because we're in relationships. If you are in defense mode, you can't be in this social engagement mode at the same time. So to learn, to grow, we've got to stop being in freeze mode all the time, in fight or flight mode all the time. Think about that in your life. Have you been in those phases often, more often than learning mode? Or are you a person that is now bringing down that self-protection mode, bringing down that self-defensive mode, right? Defensive, all the way on the defensive side. Think about it. And I'm going to leave you with some questions. When somebody tells you something and they're just doing it out of the kindness of their heart because they really have good intentions for you and they really want you to grow or learn and they see something about you and they try to tell you something, do you get on the defensive mode right away? Does it feel defensive to you immediately? If you do, that's something to go down that journey. Ask yourself why. Why are you always on the defensive side? What happened to you that you feel like you've got to just always be on the defensive defensive mode, right? And then remember this, you cannot grow and you cannot learn when you're in that mode all the time. It's impossible. It's not going to happen. So I want to challenge you today. If you've been on the defensive mode for a long time, ask yourself why. You've been activating those nerves, right? The stress levels are up high, your heart's beating, you've got all this, your blood is being pumped to the heart, to the brain, to the muscles, and it's giving you more sugar. So I would ask this question, if you have high levels of sugar, could it be the problem is that you've been on defensive mode for a long time? People who have been with high levels of sugar might want to ask themselves that question because remember, this podcast is body, soul, and spirit. It's all connected. You can't disconnect your body from your soul. You just can't. And you can't disconnect the spirit. And so maybe you're in defensive mode a long time. You have high levels, high blood sugar. Maybe it's defensive mode. I've had to defend myself for so long that now you're triggering, right, these sugar levels. And maybe kind of go on the journey, like what makes me uncomfortable? And I can't be in both modes. I can't. There's no way you can grow and learn. So the next time you want to respond, I should say it like this, the next time you want to react and you've been in fight or flight or you freeze, right? Because the fear is there, you freeze instead of like really checking in with yourself, right? And you think it's fine, but you've been in fight or flight response for a long time. It's not healthy to be in that fight or flight. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to be vulnerable with everybody. There are some relationships or some people that will come into your life that you've got to beware. Flags go up. And so check in with yourself. But that doesn't mean that you have to be in defensive mode all the time. I'll give you an example with me personally. I'm one of those people that can read people like pretty well. And I've always had that gift, even when I was young. I think it's a God gift. I know it's a God gift. I don't think I know. It's a God gift. And I could read people. Well, for a long time, fear would grip. So I would be on the defensive mode. And I would want to maybe correct it right away or jump the gun, so to speak. And I've learned throughout the years that that wasn't healthy. I was in fight or flight. I was in defensive mode because of previous situations that had happened to me. And I'm learning throughout the years, and I'm going to be on the learning journey for the rest of my life. But I'm learning now when I do perceive, if you will, that's a good word, maybe if I could perceive like this is a dangerous thing right here. And if I perceive something, I don't go into defensive mode anymore. I want to learn. I want to grow. Therefore, I allow myself, right, to be in relationship, maybe not close, but in relationship with that individual because maybe that individual needs help. Or maybe that individual is needing more care, more attention. However, I've been also in relationship with people that they want to just destroy you. Now, in fight or flight, maybe I would probably stem more towards fight or flight, but also learning mode. At the same time, I'd probably go back and forth with it. I hope this is helping something practical for you guys. I'd probably go back and forth with it. If it's somebody who's dangerous, somebody who I know is after for destruction, doesn't want the best for you, because I think all my listeners probably have had a relationship like that. You have to be careful because not everybody wants bad for you. They're hurting too. But I'm talking about the relationships that do want bad for you. I might go into fight or flight, defensive mode, but I might also go into learning mode, meaning I'm not going to be attached to that relationship because that's not wise to do. It's toxic and it's hurting me. So I might be blunt. I might be a little bit more blunt. And I might be in a fight or flight defensive mode. But at the same time, I want to grow from that and learn from that as well. And not necessarily give them rightful access, but just something practical. Because if somebody out there, one of my listeners is asking, yeah, but what about, am I going to just learn and grow from every relationship, never go into fight or flight? No, just like a reptile has its own defense mechanisms. God built us that way. When there's an attack externally, right? We can actually be in defensive mode at times as well. And it doesn't mean that we don't grow from it fully. But I'm talking to my audience in this podcast, to those of us that have been in defensive mode for a long time, and it's not healthy. So ask yourself those questions. It's a lot of thinking, you might have to step back from that relationship, maybe get second opinion, third opinion, like, hey, what do you think of this relationship? Are you seeing the same thing I am? Yes. And if you are, and those red flags are going up, then yes, obviously you'd be in a fight or flight mode at that time. Grow from it, learn from it, and detach from it. But also ask yourself this question: are there relationships that maybe you've been in defensive mode and you need not be? It's just something that you've been in for a very long time, and that was how you've lived, and it's now unhealthy. It's unhealthy for your growing. It's unhealthy for your learning, and you shouldn't be in that mode all the time. And it's time to maybe become balanced and go into a learning and growing mode as well. And we will see you guys next time.